Well, hello YouTube, it's me, Fortmaster, and welcome back to another Dorked reaction, and man, it has been a while since I've watched one of their videos, and I'm happy that they're finally putting out new ones now that chapters 3 and 4 are out. Today's video is Fate, Freedom, and Gerson Boom's Legacy. Thinking back to when I watched Jaru's video about about the night being Gerson or something like that, and Oberon's smog, and the fact that actually came true, at least in a sense, with, you know, with like a darkener made from Gerson Boom's remains actually being a thing. Like, even though, you know, he's only for that one chapter, and I very much doubt we're ever going to be actually seeing him again, the fact that we actually got something like that was so awesome. And the fact that we actually saw Gerson, like, I wouldn't say in his prime, but again, like, back in, like, fighting shape, when we actually got to, again, like, it's one of those things, I forget whose video it was I watched, but they said that, you know, a lot of the stuff that like, is going on with Deltarune is that, you know, it's filling in holes that we didn't get to see in Undertale some of the times. Like, again, Gerson, we know that, you know, originally Gerson in Undertale was the head of the Royal Guard before Undyne, and Gerson was one of the people that trained Undyne along with Asgore. So you look, and the fact that her attacks are like slightly less and like slightly worse versions of Gerson's attack, where hers only go in 4 directions while his went in 8 and stuff like that. Again, and also just his theme. His theme is just beautiful. Again, banjo and mouth harp. I mean, that with the freedom motif, I love Hammer of Justice. It's so far, it's like top 5. It's in the top 5 of my, like, favorite songs in the Deltarune soundtrack at this point. I just need to figure out what the other 4 songs are. Yeah, but then on top of all that, there's just everything that, you know, he was talking about in chapter 4. You know, about, you know, finding freedom and you know, like not being able to see where you're going because you're following the prophecy too closely. Which I have a feeling that might have been pointed more towards Ralsei than anything else. But you never know. Again, the idea of what the prophecy is or how it's going to play out is still a major thing. Like, I'm still playing around with the idea that, you know, the knight and who's ever helping them is very much like trying to like nudge and like kind of like push aside the prophecy without breaking it, so that it can kind of align with their goals. Again, like the whole thing that, you know, the human soul with human parts is, you know, went to Chris instead of Argon, or, you know, stuff like that. And again, like, again, it's the whole thing. Like, I'm so happy that we actually have a set time that's, you know, going to be a lot less than 4 years for when Chapter 5 comes out. But even then, like, I still want Chapter 5 now. The wait is killing me. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I should probably get this thing started then and see what the video is actually going to be about. So, yeah, of course, as always, original video is linked in the description if you haven't seen it yet for some reason. Corner video will lead to my Let's Play of the day. And if you like this video or any other video that I make, I'd very much appreciate it if you gave the video a like and subscribe to my channel, because almost 75% of the people that watch my videos aren't subscribed, and I'd very much like that to change, because my main goal for this year is to hopefully hit 10,000 subscribers. But yeah, with all that out of the way, let's get this thing started then, shall we?
Deltarune's prophecy is an integral part of its narrative framing, and it's been the topic of fandom debate for years. With the release of chapters 3 and 4, the fandom's gone wild with theories and discussions on the prophecy like never before. Is Susie the girl in the prophecy, or was it supposed to be Noelle? How will the prophecy end? It's not that these aren't interesting questions, but I think in all the attempts to solve the prophecy, we as a fandom have lost sight of chapter 4's true message. As Gerson himself said, we're fixated so much on this fairy tale that all we can see is blue. So let's take a step back and look at the prophecy, the way it influences the characters in this story, and how the relationship between Susie and Gerson ties directly into Deltarune's thesis on prophecies, predestination, and stories.
Which, okay, actually thinking about it, just thinking back, he said, like, all you can see is blue. You think that was meant to be, you think that's talking about Chris, given the fact, you know, Chris is blue in the Dark World? Because, again, like, it has been pointed out a couple of times. Like, again, going back to chapter 3, Tenna specifically points out how blue, you know, Chris is. So I wonder if that means, Or that might be warning that we might be focusing on Chris too much.
Our first exposure to the prophecy comes from the legend all the way back in Chapter 1. Ralsei gives us the basic skeleton, balance between light and dark disrupted, the human monster and Prince of the Dark who serve as the heroes, and their arrival at World's Edge to banish the angels' heaven and save the worlds. Initially, Ralsei seemed so deeply loyal to the prophecy, insisting that everything within it will come to pass, while also emphasizing that our choices still hold meaning. In a previous video, I discussed how Ralsei had what seemed to be a strange reverence for the prophecy than to the player, also noting how he avoided to mention the specifics of the roaring until Birdley almost caused it at the end of Chapter 2. All this talk of titans running wild, darkness turning to stone, endless night, it all seems so pertinent, so why did he leave it out? It felt off-putting, but now we finally have our answer. Ralsei, overwhelmed with his knowledge of the prophecy, simply wanted to make his friends happy. He left details out that he believed would be too painful and wanted to shield his friends from the knowledge that haunts him. To Ralsei, the prophecy is a curse, and one he feels rather powerless to change, but one he did wish to change after all. His desire for us to make friends and connections was his subtle rebellion. This completely flips the script on what we thought about Ralsei for all these years. Rather than being a pure loyalist, Ralsei wants to believe it can change, but also feels powerless to change the prophecy. He's swimming against the river's current, unable to find his way back to shore.
Oh god, and again, it's the whole thing, like, with like, Susie's blood on his face. And, talking about the blood, Game Theory's newest theory was actually about Deltarune, and they were talking about how they were theorizing that, Susie was or is in the prophecy. She's just not the hero. She's the girl, or another girl, or whatever. And presumably their theory was that Susie had to die. And the idea that Susie's blood could be on Ralsei. Like, I don't know whether it's like, is it supposed to be just symbolic? Or is it supposed to be, foretelling what's actually going to happen?
And I think this makes for a fantastic foil to Chapter 4's messages, but more on that later. While the prophecy is this forbidden knowledge that defines every facet of Ralsei's existence, it's just as powerful in the light world. From the moment the church service begins, the choir sings of the prophecy of Deltarune itself, shadows cutting deep, the heroes. Caddy's improvised reading further details familiar aspects, such as the heroes once again. And
that she apparently just has a feeling of knowing how cute Ralsei would actually be, which, I mean, granted, I know that's more of a cute, as in, like, a cutie-wootie sort of deal, not cute as in, oh boy, isn't he just cute, as in, like, a romantic sense. But still, like, that's sort of, like, that's, like, reading way too far into it. Like, that's like somebody reading the Bible and saying that, like, Peter would be really handsome or something like that. Like, that's just, I don't know if that's just me, but I find that really weird.
Impossible calamity, albeit delivered in Caddy's own bubbly way. While we don't get a detailed version of the prophecy from the perspective of the Lightners, we get enough details to know that the idea of the prophecy holds great meaning to the people of Hometown. And not just a hometown, as we'll later find out. During the sermon, Alvin quotes his father, the late Gerson Boom, mentioning pieces of the prophecy lost to time. But we see our first hint at Gerson's philosophy when he mentions taking a blank page and writing your own future, along with his doubts that the prophecy held the entire truth. It's brief and made easier to overlook since Chris falls asleep midway through, but it's a lovely little seed planted for later. Of course, it's a seed vastly overshadowed by the evocative glass panes in the Church Dark Worlds, foretelling events to come. Between Ralsei's belief that the prophecy is inescapable and Susie's hype at learning the future and that she's meant to play the part of a hero, we're perfectly primed to have the prophecy's immutable nature challenged. And boy is it challenged. Gerson arrives with flawless comedic timing, right as the party escapes a Titan spawn in the darkness, and all seems dire. With the flip of the switch...
Wait, was it a Titan spawn? I didn't know that. I thought they were like... I thought it was sort of like a less serious thing from what happens later in the second Dark World, where they were actually being followed by Gerson, and they were just mistaking the sounds. And then, Gerson being Gerson just kind of teleported over here to flip the switch.
And this jaunty theme tune, suddenly there's this air of levity that's been missing since the gang entered the church. Gerson's just so jolly, so bombastic, and an absolute troll with the way he teases the gang, and especially Susie. But even his teasing has a purpose. The Old Man acts show this wonderfully, the cane serving as a means to direct the party away from enemy bullets. In his eccentricity, he hides vital lessons. He breaks the prophecy glass to open a new path forward and encourages us to venture off into the unknown. Even before he starts speaking his mind about the prophecy, there's this undertone of courage in the face of the unknown that makes him so endearing. But if you point out his dislike of prophecies, we get our first real taste of this chapter's thesis. Well now, a fairy tale's a pretty little thing. Ain't it nice to believe a glimmer here and there? I just think those words shine a bit too bright. A path so blue, it's all you can see. So I say, why don't we go between the lines? It's darker there. This once again calls back to the sermon, serving as a reminder that the prophecy shouldn't be treated as the only way forward. There's a deeper reading one can make too, with all the detours like the eggs, the shadow crystals, and the shadow mantle all acting as distractions from the core story, yet fueling the imagination and curiosity of players. Given that the Dark Worlds tie directly into notions of imagination and fantasy, these little side activities only strengthen Gerson's words. But this isn't the only example. His entire relationship with Susie comes at just the right time, as Susie's grappling with how to move forward as a hero after she and her friends failed to save Undyne. Even before stepping into the Dark Worlds, Susie's taken charge with the investigation. She's made deductions, she's schemed. This puts her in stark contrast to Chris, who, while also deeply attached to Susie and prone to take place in her mischief even without our inputs, still remains beholden to the whims of Carol and or the Knight. Unless Carol is the Knight, but that's a topic for another video.
Yeah.
Chapter 4, more than the chapters before, places Susie in the role of protagonist, with her personal journey and struggles at the forefront. This creates such a fascinating tug-of-war between Susie's independence and her desire to learn more about the prophecy.
Which, actually thinking about it, again, like, the fact, I've heard people, say that, Susie's the actual main protagonist, or we're the main protagonist, or, stuff like that. But thinking about it, with like, all this effort, like, that's going into, like, Susie and her character development, I wonder, granted, I still don't believe that Susie's going to die, or at least not, she'll probably get hurt, but I don't think she'll be the one to actually die. But if she is, Toby is setting up a lot of red flags potentially for her, which then could actually be pointing towards there actually being false flags.
On one hand, the fun and games of the Dark Worlds have washed away, replaced with genuine danger and stakes. To that end, prophecy paves a path for her to follow and gives her stability and a sense of purpose. And it makes sense given what we learned about Susie in these chapters. She was mistreated wherever she went, never made lasting friendships, and her later story about the piano and the plaza really emphasizes her pain.
Yeah.
Being told she can't play, being yelled at for not singing hymns correctly, it's all been beaten into her so many times that at the start of the game she's accepted her bad girl image and lives up to it.
Which again, if I remember where I can find it, but again, I've shared it once before, but I love this piece of art, and I remember seeing this piece of this picture on Twitter where somebody made where it's like, oh, it's Chris as the only human in a room full of monsters, and then the other side it's Susie being the only monster in like a room full of humans, which they've said is they don't think is the canon thing, but it was just a really good like picture. And again, I really do love that depiction. It's really nice, and I hope it actually does become true.
Now she's finally growing to embrace her compassion, her hope, and her ability to break the rules. We already saw this in Chapter 3, when she switched the controllers and urged Ralsei to take control. She refused to accept that Ralsei was just an object, something subservient to her and Chris, just as she refused to accept the idea of Tenna getting thrown out and sought to find a new home for him instead. Ralsei's room is empty because he doesn't believe he needs or deserves his own belongings or identity. That won't do. Better fill up the room to show Ralsei that he's more than his role in the prophecy. The same applies to Chris.
God.
When she saw how barren their side of the room was, she took one of Azriel's star decorations and threw it on their side. To say nothing of how she expresses genuine concern over a bloodstain on the floor that even Toriel seemed to overlook. Susie doesn't let rules or expectations stop her. She does what she wants. Even in Chapter 1, she ignored orders and acted as one of the bad guys rather than being the perfect prophetic hero. While she eventually did come around, her growth as a hero happened on her own terms, due to her own strength. She's the one who unlocked R and S action, refusing to just follow orders and rely on Chris alone. This went starkly in contrast with Ralsei, who believed Chris should be the one directing them to act. This happens again in the city, with her dragging Ralsei off rather than letting us choose who to go with.
Again, that's one of those things, like, it goes back to my theory that, Susie isn't actually, it's like, she's not even just the other girl in the prophecy, she's just not in the prophecy. Because if, Rousey has said, and I'm going to assume he's, telling the truth here, that the prophecy will always come to pass even if it's broken. It'll, always cut back on track. So my whole belief is the fact that, given, Susie may not actually be, in the prophecy at all, so therefore she's not actually, bound to fate, so to speak, so she can do whatever she wants. Thus, as, Dork has shown, all the times when Susie breaks the rules, because the rules don't actually apply to her.
Ralsei tries to give Chris, as well as us, agency, but Susie's agency overshadows it in that moment. Ralsei has ideas of how the story should go and the roles each of them should play, even if he does encourage some degree of choice. But it's not Susie's choices that he typically values, even if he does value her friendship. We see that sort of conflict arise again here, when Susie tries to heal, but Ralsei overshadows her. It's like the hymns and the pianos all over again. Susie is being excluded from something she cares about, even if Ralsei isn't intentionally hurting her. It's possible that Ralsei just doesn't want her to be disappointed because she's not as good at healing. But by robbing her of the chance to try, it tanks her self-esteem. Susie doubts she should be anything more than what she knows she's good at. She needs someone who's willing to defy expectations and encourage her to follow her heart.
God, this... Thinking back, I'm going back just a second here. I'm looking at, I remember a little tiny theory that I had, back when it was only chapters 1 and 2, that it was always, and this kind of goes into the whole theory that at one point, if and or when Susie learns that, we're controlling Chris and there's a fight between Chris and Susie, my little theory I had at the time was that in every chapter, Susie's hair was going to be pulled more back and, be neater, where in chapter 1, for basically the entire chapter, hair's over her eyes, she's, very, kind of disheveled slightly and stuff like that. Then in chapter 2, we actually see her eyes, for the most part, in her talk sprites. And then I was going to imagine that maybe as chapters went on, her hair would be pulled back into a ponytail or something like that, just, to show that it was, neater and she was, taking better care of herself. And then when we eventually fight her, the talk sprites go back to the chapter 1 where she's completely eyes covered, she's completely closed off, all this sort of stuff. I would have loved to have seen that. I mean, granted, we might still get that. I mean, it might just be on a much longer time scale than I was anticipating.
Heart. She needs Gerson Boom. Gerson does something so vital for Susie. He believes in her without hesitation. In every one of their interactions, he imparts a lesson, even if that lesson sneaks in through teasing and trolling. He goads her into healing Jackenstein. He asks her to write his letter. Gerson's method of teaching is sneaky and sly, but the important part is that he doesn't talk down to Susie. He challenges her, but does so in a kind way where she knows she's appreciated and that it's okay for her to be imperfect. For Susie, who's chasing after this idealized idea of the prophecy and the idea that she's a preordained hero, Gerson nudges her closer to going between the lines. He breaks the glass because no one else will, and these children need to learn how to chart their own course before the prophecy swallows them whole. Little by little, Gerson helps her along. His battle teaches her persistence and strongly incentivizes strengthening her healing, since Gerson steals her items if you try to use them instead.
God, it's funny. I remember I watched a couple of people that never actually did that. They played and just never used her healings, using her, her healing. I watched a couple of people, and after they, the item was taken by Gerson, they then just never tried to use the healing spell at all. And, oh god, I remember, even if it's not that good, it still, buys you more time. Oh.
It's a test of endurance, not only due to the difficult attacks, but due to the gradual growth of OK Heal, which is contrasted by the way that Gerson's attacks grow weaker the lower Susie's HP drops. He doesn't actually want to hurt her, he wants her to learn and grow. But even in the heat of battle, he imparts more lessons by way of summarizing his book series, The Lord of the Hammer. And it's here that we learn that Lord of the Hammer is based on the prophecy, albeit with its own creative spin. Each chapter he lays out aligns with the chapters we've played, which allows us to connect our own experiences in the story with Gerson's work, but also predicts what's to come. Yet again, it's tempting to let the fairy tale dictate everything. There's comfort in knowing what to expect. Surprises can be fun, but they can be just as daunting too. But then Gerson says nothing of the sixth and final chapter written, instead emphasizing how the author was swallowed by his own creation and a proper ending never came. Not only does this add to the existing Gerson and Gaster parallels that I already discussed in my initial Gerson video, but it transitions into perhaps the most important thesis of this fight.
Okay, actually thinking about it, something I just realized there. I mean, granted, I know it's, Deltarune and stuff like that, but even in the game, I didn't say anything about it, like, when I was playing, but, like, the fact that, the entire novel, this basically, like, Lord of the Rings-esque story that Gerson wrote, only had, like, 5 chapters in it, and the 6th was never published. I always kind of wondered how that actually worked, and it only just occurred to me how that could actually work. Because, like, what if, each chapter that he's saying he wrote wasn't just a single chapter in a book, but it was, an entire book in itself, and each book was a chapter in the Lord of the Hammer, so to speak. And, like, with Chapter 6 never being released, like, what if Gerson kind of fell into a similar thing with, J.R.R. Martin with, A Tale of Ice and Fire, where, Chapter 6, or Book 6, however you want to say it, was supposed to be, the last book in a series, but he got, the series got so big, he couldn't finish writing it, and unfortunately for Gerson, he eventually just died of old age before he could actually finish it.
The story was left open to the youth to write their own tales, but they never did. It's likely the youth, in this case, refers to Alvin, given the contents of Gerson's letter. Perhaps at one point, he wanted Alvin to finish his story, but as we see in the church, Alvin doesn't value his skills as a writer. He lives in his father's shadows to such a degree that he even has Gerson's hammer and dust in his office, rather than letting it rest in his grave. How fitting, then, that in addition to trusting Susie with his letter to Alvin, Gerson also sees the story in her eyes. He sees the hope crossed on her heart and urges her to carry the white pen to cut through the darkness and create her own ending. Perhaps this is why the girl slide has a sword in the end, but that's mere conjecture. What I find interesting about this exchange is that when Susie says she doesn't want an ending, Gerson supports this wholeheartedly. Susie's enthusiasm, her desire for eternity, is still a form of passion and drive, the very thing Gerson encourages with all of his heart. I believe that, more than anything, he wants Susie to be true to herself, no matter what others think or expect of her. She should write her story, go between the lines, and get messy. This attitude resonates deeply with Susie, too. For once, here's someone who doesn't make her feel stupid, who is okay if she doesn't get things perfect the first try, as long as she gives it her all and keeps learning. Even when she's doubtful she can transcribe the long piano melody, Gerson encourages her to do her best. Here, she's safe to explore new horizons, and the significance of this kindness shines throughout the chapter. Even when entrusting the letter to her, his words speak volumes. As long as you get the point, the words don't matter. The tea party scene features similar sentiments at play. Gerson urges Susie to recount their adventure thus far. Though we don't get to see a beat-for-beat retelling, coming from Susie, it's sure to have had her own creative spark, magnified by her using silverware and sugar cubes to recreate the battles. Ain't no better story than one told with sparkling eyes, Gerson says. She ain't got no fear, that one. Doubt, irony, that's what poisons your story.
Oh god, that's just the... I mean, it's not just, storytelling, but anything. I mean, if you have passion, people can tell. Passion breeds quality. More quality than money could ever create. I mean, money just basically acts as a multiplier, and if you, throw money at something without passion, you can tell.
That and too much predictability. The prophecy is preordained, allegedly, a literal prediction etched in glass. For Gerson, it's far better for the youth to carve their own path. Much like with Susie, he asks Rolsey where he thinks the story is headed, but he offers a less certain answer than Susie, which further expresses how Rolsey sees the prophecy as this inescapable force, despite his best efforts. And then there's Chris, trapped as a cage puppeteered by us and chained down by a mysterious promise. The lack of freedom to truly choose for themselves, restrained by their past, their circumstances, and this game. And we, the player, are just as constrained by the narrative by virtue of us playing a video game with a predestined path. Even the weird route is merely an illusion of freedom. This is what makes Gerson and Susie so compelling, as they each defy the rules and expectations thrust upon them. Here we have this secret boss who never used the Shadow Crystal, never went mad. His fight is a lesson, a duel, and one filled with warmth and wisdom rather than the struggle of darkness at their wits' end, or the grueling gauntlet the Roaring Night presents. Even in death, Gerson finds a way to leave a mark through the letter he entrusts to Susie in his triumphant return during the Titan battle, when all hope seems lost. His spirit shines bright, and he savors the short-lived second chance with a smile and a laugh.
Honestly, I have to think about it. Does anybody know, because honestly, all the playthroughs I saw people playing Deltarune Chapter 4, they all did or discovered, at the very least, the secret boss. I have to wonder, did anybody see any playthroughs where, people didn't do the secret boss in Chapter 4, and then just all of a sudden they see, Gerson in a full suit of armor? What was their reaction to that? For them, that would have just come out of nowhere.
In Susie, he sees something special. She reminds him of a character in his own story, a story that would later go on to inspire Dragon Blazers. The Prophecy, Lord of the Hammer, Dragon Blazers, each time the story was retold, things changed. One interpretation begets another, and in those retellings, change has opened new paths. Words on the wall don't dictate Susie's worth as a hero. Her actions and choices do, as they live through the latest retelling. That's why I believe Susie shines as the truest depiction of freedom in Deltarune. The only thing holding her back is her doubt due to years of mistreatment, being judged unfairly, and giving up on being her true self until she finally found friendship and support to lift her up and reignite the hope in her heart.
You know, I just thought of something, and it would be really weird or awesome. I don't know, I'd have to see. But, you know, it would be, like, really weird. So, they said, you know, retelling and, like, changes are, you know, good and stuff like that. Can you imagine if, you know, once, you know, chapters, you know, all the way up to chapter 7 is actually released, that it turns out that none of those endings that we could potentially get in the game are actually canon. And the way you actually get the canon ending is actually downloading a mod, like maybe a mod that Toby uploads on like some site under like a pseudonym or something, and that's how you get the canon ending, by like making like derived work from from Deltarune essentially. That'd be weird.
The trouble is, Susie grew so attached to Gerson, she wasn't ready to let go. It's understandable. This is one of the few adults to actually treat her with respect and care, so when she makes her fountain, she's eager to see him again, not just for the code, but for a chance to bring him back to Castletown. Opening the fountain is a choice that Ralsei would never approve of, but it's an idea that's truly and wonderfully Susie. They can't move forward without the combination to open the door.
Does anyone else notice that when Susie questions Chris on whether they keep the knife with them at all times, Chris blushes?
Their business isn't finished here, so she does what feels right, even though she's never tried it before. And it works. Or so she thinks. In truth, she didn't account for the fact that her will and the knights are so staggeringly different, and that she didn't know Gerson Boom in life. Even so, the second sanctuary peppers the path with more prophecy glass, further emboldening Susie as she yearns to learn more about her alleged future. She finds comfort and meaning in being one of the heroes, despite her reservations in Chapter 1. Back then, she didn't believe she could be heroic due to a life of pain and being beaten down. Thanks to her growth throughout the past 3 chapters, however, that's all changed. However, in this moment, all she sees is blue, tracing the answers with such conviction that she briefly leaves Chris in the dust. Yeah. But it's not surprising, given her attitude until now. Right after solving the piano puzzle that leads to Jackenstein, Susie highlights how following the prophecy got them that far, and continuing to follow it would make their lives easier. The scene even plants the seed with Susie questioning why Ralsei just doesn't tell them more. And while Susie doesn't dwell on it at the time, this question rears its head in explosive fashion after the encounter with the fake Gerson. Susie went through all of this, making the fountain, searching desperately for Gerson, only to get attacked not by his twisted form, but a statue. Only after Ralsei saves her and Chris does he reveal the dangers of trying to make Dark Worlds to revive the dead, and, understandably, Susie is pissed. But this represents an interesting turning point, too. When Ralsei finally spills his heart about the burdens the prophecy places upon him, Susie relaxes. She lets him lead, and she stops caring so much about what the prophecy holds for the time. She's back to following her gut, being true to herself. In fact, she only stumbles upon the final prophecy pane when she tries to hunt down Gerson, and in a poignant moment, she smashes it with her fist. There's already been so much speculation on what the shattered glass says. We know it's a tragedy, but whether it's the sealing of the Grand Fountain, the death of a major character, or something else, the specifics hardly matter. Susie's already made up her mind. She's already chosen to rebel against his fate, just as she's rebelled against the rules of this story time and time again.
Yeah.
In this moment, whether she is or isn't the intended girl of the prophecy hardly matters. She's her own self-made hero, and as Gerson stated at the end of his fight, there's great potential for her, independent of what the writing on the wall says.
Yeah, she's
perhaps
the
the greatest sign
dragon.
of this comes in her flavor text on the stats menu. Initially, she's the dark hero who carries out fate with the blade. If you defeat Gerson, she becomes the axe of justice who faces fate with the blade. It's a transformation brought on by her inner strength. That strength is so profound that Ralsei, though overwhelmed with fear and doubt, really truly wants to believe that fate can change. In the normal route, the scene is bittersweet, but leans sweet, as it lacks the darker, more ominous note of the weird route Ralsei, questioning if changing the ending won't just create something worse. And I think that difference, too, highlights something significant about Susie's role in Deltarune's thesis. So at this point, we've established a few things about Deltarune's prophecy in Chapter 4's exploration of stories, predestination, and agency. The prophecy is an all-consuming aspect of not only the Dark World, but the Light World through religion and pop culture. It's been iterated on. retold, and shaped to create new stories. And even the game we're playing is now arguably just another iteration, albeit one happening in real time within Deltarune's world.
Yeah.
The prophecy, in many regards, represents a lack of agency and autonomy within this story. Ralsei lives with extensive knowledge of it and the burdens that come with it. Chris, as our player vessel, is subject to our whims, while also tied down to whatever promise they made to the mysterious caller. By that metric, the prophecy is an antagonistic force, even if it also represents hope to some of the characters through faith and community. In stark contrast, Susie is entirely free-spirited, and is the most active force in the narrative by virtue of her strong will and determination. Throughout each chapter, she pushes things along, whether it's by stealing the chalk to kickstart the adventure, initiating R and S action, and pushing along both Birdley and Noelle's development, her boundless compassion that she extends to Ralsei, Tenna, and so many others, or her drive to find the code to the shelter and stop the knight from hurting anyone else. She began as a bully and an underdog, but she has grown with each passing chapter. In short, Susie is the protagonist.
Again, all those things, because, again, we like to think of ourselves as a protagonist. But the fact, everything is, again, just going back to the whole red flags, and the whole, or not red flags, death flags. The fact, everything is kind of revolving around Susie so much. She's the one getting so much character development. She's the one that's, moving things forward. God, it really does kind of maybe point towards the possibility of something happening to her at the very least. Whether it is actually her dying, or if it's simply, her finally figuring out what we are and our part in the story, and, her reactions to it. And knowing Susie, she might actually win.
And I think this leads into some interesting potential when it comes to Deltarune's ending and the directions it could take. Do we, as players, try to do everything in our power to rewrite the story, even if it means making Noelle our puppet and forcing Chris to hurt the people around them? Do we put our trust in Susie, the story's truest hero, and let her lead? The Weird Route is a rebellion against Deltarune's narrative by way of using our player agency to override that of Chris and Noelle, disrupting the narrative through cruelty and manipulation, and even destabilizing the world, if the glitchy choice box in Chapter 4 is any indication. And what's interesting to me is how Chapter 4 sets this up as a path to pursue. When Ralsei ponders if there could be a way to change the ending in the normal route, it plants a curious seed. The S-Rank minigames in Chapter 3 act as a tutorial to the Weird Route in Chapter 2. It's all set up in temptation, and it all flies in stark contrast to everything we see with Gerson and Susie's arc in the chapter.
Again, it's one of those things. I've said it before, and again, I can't for the life of me remember who or where I first saw it, but again, that the S-Rank minigames in Chapter 3, where I'm fairly certain were how we were supposed to figure out that, the Weird Route was actually a thing. Yeah, originally, when all these were supposed to be released in one single go. I can't help but feel that we may have, broken, the intended I can't help but feel that we may have broken the intended experience of the game a little bit by Toby, releasing it piecemeal like this.
Doubt and irony poison stories, after all. And the strongest stories are the ones told with sparkling eyes. In a way, it's a test for us. Can we handle a story that doesn't technically revolve around us? What's more important to us when engaging with video game narratives? Our own personal freedom, or getting immersed within the story the author concocted for us? Can someone besides the player character make a meaningful change? If so, then isn't it worthwhile to support her and see where the story goes? I, for one, look forward to seeing where Deltarune heads in Chapter 5 and beyond, now that the prophecy has been built up as its own form of antagonist, and perhaps even a greater one than Carol and or the Knight, by virtue of its imposing presence on everything we've seen thus far. However, I think there's one more takeaway from Chapter 4, and that's the all-consuming power of prediction and engagement with stories. With so many years between Chapter 2 and the latest release, we as a fanbase let our imaginations run wild as we tried to make sense of the story and direction it headed.
Oh god, yeah, this whole scene, this was specifically pointing fun at theorists. I know it.
With so many fan imaginings of the TV world, Tenna, Mike, and other concepts, some are left disappointed by what we eventually got, or may feel as though their own imagined ideas for Deltarune are less valuable. Don't be disheartened, though. Even if the fan theories, characters, and chapter concepts aren't canon, that doesn't mean they had no meaning. Gerson himself embraces the idea of iterative stories and reimaginings. When given the homages to fan theories in the Mike fight, even Toby sees the joy in the fandom's imagination. But please feel free to share your thoughts on Deltarune's prophecy in the comments, as well as any predictions you have going forward. While we wait for the next release, there's certainly no shortage of possibilities to explore. And if you'd like to see my initial blind experiences on the new chapters, check out the linked playlist in the description and the end screen. I'll also be posting the unedited VODs on my second channel, for those who want to see me struggle with the Roaring Knight for hours. I've started streaming more often, and you can find me at twitch.tv/derpisms. Additionally, if you'd like to stay up to date with future projects for this channel, as well as Inverted Fate and other works, head on over to my Patreon. I just recently posted some new concept sketches for an upcoming Inverted Fate chapter, and I'm hoping to get more goodies up in the future. There are a lot more Deltarune ideas buzzing around in my head, so stay tuned in the coming months for more analyses, possibly some more theories, and if I can get my ADHD to cooperate, that long-teased Goro Akechi analysis, one of these days. For now, thank you all for watching, and have a fantastic day.
Again, like, even if he only appears, well, most likely if he only appears in this one chapter, I forever think that Gerson left such a giant and lasting impact on the story, even if he is in such a small portion of it. Absolutely wonderful character. And I truly wish, like, again, all the different ways that, you know, people are potentially saying how the prophecy could work, or whether Susie's actually in it, or, you know, all that sort of stuff. I want more. But yeah, I mean, and also on a side note, I've never actually read all the way through Dork's Inverted Fate story. So I'm almost wondering, like, would you guys be interested in, you know, me making a video on it, like, just as like a read along or something like that? I don't know, might be an idea if, you know, enough people want to see it, who knows? But yeah, that's definitely going to be it for now. So yeah, I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.